FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome, and you are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz, and hey, world, a scary place right now. You're not sure which way to turn, which way to hide, if you can hide at all, which is doubtful in and of itself. And that's why when we want to get a worldly perspective, we turn to Alasdair MacLeod, his site financeandeconomics.org, a staple of FSN. And hey, Alasdair, been too long. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Thank you, Kerry. It's nice to talk to you again.
Likewise. So what's the entity we're working for these days?
I'm head of research for Gold Money in Jersey. Yeah, I mean, that's Jersey, the island just off the south coast of England. And we were acquired by BitGold, which is a Canadian company listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange venture section. And what BitGold basically have come up with is a means of giving you a debit card which has gold outside the banking system, separately vaulted, to back your payments and receipts and so on going through your debit card. And this is very important because it bypasses the banking system. It means that you can make payments around the world, and I think in up to 100 currencies. And crucially, it's a lot cheaper than using the bank's systems. Just as an example, I went to a wedding in France earlier this year, and on a sterling debit card, when I used it to buy things like pay for restaurant meals and so on, the charge averaged somewhere between 4 and 5%. In this case, BitGold, it's quite simple. It's a 1% charge turning a payment in to your account into gold, and it's a 1% charge spending your gold in fiat currency. So it's a lot cheaper, and there's a huge market out there as well for remittances. I don't know. I mean, a wealthy man like you has probably got a Filipino maid or something cooking in the background for you. But I mean, if you have, she's probably got relatives back at home in Manila, and she will send them money from the enormous amount that you pay her. But unfortunately for her, by the time that money arrives in her relatives' hands in Manila, the charges that transfer has suffered is in the region of 6 to 7%. And this way, she can use her BitGold card. It's a 1% charge. That's it. And if her relatives at the other end in Manila have a BitGold account, there is no charge for transfer from one account to the other. So I think this is going to be a game changer. I mean, the interesting thing is that, obviously you've got a risk on the gold price, but I think an awful lot of people are taking the view that gold has fallen quite a long way. It's consolidated over the last 4 years or so. Dollars and any other currency you care to mention have been printed in huge quantities. Perhaps it's not a bad idea, value-wise, to take a punt on running an account in gold. And I mean, this is growing like topsy. I mean, in 3 or 4 months, we've got over 300,000 accounts now.
My goodness.
And it's all around the world. I mean, this is a rate of growth which is sort of, it's up with the internet greats, I think, almost, when they started. I think most of the internet greats had sort of something like 1 million accounts in their first year of operations.
Wow.
I think we're sort of heading towards that at the current rates. So it could be an interesting one.
So the only other service that I know that's even similar is one that our good friend Peter Schiff has at Euro Pacific Bank, which I think is in the Grenadines or someplace like that. And they've got a hoard of gold, and they give you an ATM card, but Americans can't use it at the present time. Can Americans use BitGold, or that's being worked on now?
Yes, no, they can.
They can use it.
Yeah.
So big difference there. Because Americans specifically are excluded from Schiff's product. In fact, you have to prove you're not an American to open an account in this bank. That's the ironic part.
Well, this is this is a problem actually that all American citizens face because of their government's attitude towards their citizens opening accounts abroad. They make it very, very difficult for any bank. And this is, I don't know, what the difference is between Peter Schiff's operation and ours, because I mean, I've got a sort of idea of how ours works, but I've got no idea how Peter's works. But if you're a bank outside the US, when it comes to operating accounts for American nationals, most bankers say no, forget it. We don't want the hassle.
Why would they?
So yeah, and so I think probably what American nationals are falling foul of are banking. It's what's applied to banks, if you like. The point about BitGold is that it's not a bank. We don't actually own your gold. The gold is owned by you. We just facilitate it with a card, but what we do is we do all the compliance checks and everything else that the regulators require, you just run. In effect, it's a debit card without a bank account. The asset behind it isn't the bank's asset in your account, as it were. It's it's actually your gold deposited in a vault of your choice. And I think there are about 4 or 5 vaults around the world which you can select from.
That is pretty cool. And with what's going on with the dollar, with the currency wars, with what China did with their devaluations, you need that protection more than ever, don't you?
Yeah, there is a lot going on. It's, I think there's an American expression, under the hood. If you look under the hood, it can get quite scary. There are all sorts of straws in the wind that I think are worrying some quite senior people in the financial system. But, of course, we don't know what's in the future. We just sort of worry that the future might turn out not to be terribly good. Certainly this has been the case, I think, with the Chinese devaluation. That to me was a very interesting operation because in the middle of August, I think it was August the 11th, August the 12th, they devalued by a small amount. But actually, if you look and see what they did was they revalued the dollar rather than devalue their own currency. The reason I say that is it's important to understand that in terms of trade, China is far more important than America. Yeah. America has the reserve currency, but China has the trade. There was the general who is in charge of the People's Liberation Army's military strategy, in a speech back in April, made the point that Alipay, which is the payments arm of Alibaba, actually handled more consumer transactions over their Valentine holiday, which was November the 11th in 2014, than the whole of the American online and retail industry over the 3 Thanksgiving Day holidays. So this gives you an idea just how big China has become in terms of trade, because obviously, the consumer demand is the end product of all trade. So China really does actually run the world when it comes to trade, not America. America has the currency, and she can lean on people and make life unpleasant for them if they don't kowtow to her. But China actually runs the whole thing, and I think that was the point that China was trying to make by forcing a revaluation on the dollar. And of course, the reason that everything started going haywire for the dollar was that the Fed suddenly realized that with the higher dollar rate, exports weren't going to work so well. So, America's export industries were going to suffer. And not only that, but the costs, if you like, of imports were going to fall. So the trade deficit was going to balloon outwards. And the net result of all that is that raising interest rates, which was what the Fed wanted to do in September, literally 1 month after this action, had to be put on hold. It couldn't, and so, the whole thing, just the whole of the Fed's interest rate policy had effectively been hijacked by China. It's a fascinating situation.
Yeah, that is fascinating. There was just an article released moments ago, Alasdair, on the Wall Street Journal site that said the middle class in China is now the largest in the world. It's passed the United States middle class. And you can only look to the future, regardless of what's going on with the economy there now, and say that that's an immutable trend that's probably going to continue onward for quite some time to come.
Yes, I would agree with you on that statement. I mean, it really comes from two ways. The U.S. economy is not growing at all. I would define it as being stuck in a sort of it's a zombie economy, if you like, and I think that is the effect of zero interest rate policy in exactly the same way as the Japanese economy has been a zombie for the last 20 years for the same reason. China, meanwhile, she actually has a plan B. She has a 5-year plan which starts next year, and under that plan, she is going to switch her domestic economic resources and refocus them towards developing her backyard. And her backyard is the whole of the Asian continent. And she's doing this in partnership with Russia. Russia has the raw materials. China has the manufacturing capability. China is increasing the level of technological sophistication as well. I mean, basically, there's going to be, if you like, an industrial revolution throughout Asia. We're talking about a population of about 3.5 billion people. They're going to have an industrial revolution, which would be more of a change than anybody has ever seen in a short period of time. I would say that the industrial revolution, top to bottom, throughout Asia will probably be about 25 years. And that's an extraordinary thing if you think about it. So China realizes this. This is what she's planning to do in conjunction with Russia, which is why Russia is trying to secure her borders against NATO to the west, incidentally. Also, they will bring in other Asian countries. Some of them are already in there as members or associates with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the umbrella organization for all this development. India is in there. Other countries, well, India is about to join, I should say. Other countries which have signaled clearly their intention to join include Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and from memory, I think Mongolia. No, Mongolia has actually now joined. Oh, and Iran, very important one. Now, that will give the Shanghai Cooperation Organization access to the Gulf. And not only that, but I think that the major customers for the Arab world, and particularly Saudi Arabia, are no longer the West. I don't think Saudi Arabia supplies any oil to America now. It's all going into Asia, and particularly China. So you can see that this is a new empire, if you like. I put that in inverted commas. Being formed under, if you like, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization umbrella. And it is deliberate. That's where they're going to go. So the switching of resources from the legacy industries, basically supplying cheap stuff to Europe and America, that is something that is planned. Now, I don't know whether it'll work. I mean, the track record of governments actually managing things.
Yeah, you're a free market person here.
But we can see the strategy. I think that's the important thing. And until it doesn't work, we really ought to take note.
Yeah, see the strategy. They are strategic thinkers, but still a government corrupt as any that's ever been put on the planet here, Alasdair, and has massive failures to its credit. Just look at the Chinese banking system, insolvent. They basically had to spend 10% of GDP in a matter of a couple of days to support this devaluation. Real problems here. We always like to look at the new guys and say, gee, they really know what they're doing. But it's the initiative of the people that has gotten them where they are, more so than the government. The government, just like the best thing the government can do is get out of the way. And that's the thing that they're the worst at doing generally.
Well, I mean, I would agree with you if you were talking about a typical welfare economy. But I have to say that it is somewhat different when you have an economy which is run by a small clique of mercantilists who have a definite objection as to where they want to go, and they are not going to let anyone stop them. I mean, you mentioned the Chinese banks. If the Chinese banking system had been in the West, we would have had a huge banking crisis. But the fact is that those banks are all owned by the government. So it's not a problem.
Just print more money, and hope for the best.
More money, more credit, and they tell the banks what to do. Now, I'm not saying that this is the right way of doing things, and it goes completely against any libertarian or free market instincts. But you can see what they're doing, and you can see how they're using free markets for their benefit. And the point is, they have the power to do it, which means they have the support of their people to do it. In the case of China, I mean, they got the support of the people because the people daren't revolt. And
they have no choice.
So long as things aren't,
as long as they're fed
very badly, then they can hold it together. In the case of Russia, Putin is genuinely popular. And I mean, okay, there are a few dissenters, but he's been successful as far as his electorate are concerned. So it is a mercantilist approach. These guys are acting like old-fashioned princes. We own you, therefore you are going to do what I say. That is their approach. That would cut no ice in the West at all.
Oh, you have rebellions.
We still have the corruption and everything else that you mentioned. We're just corrupt in a different way. I mean, what's the difference between Chinese corruption and a political system that works purely on patronage?
Oh, I'm not defending this, believe me, but we do.
I mean, it's horses for courses.
We do have the right to go onto the soapbox and say our piece without going to jail too often.
Well, there is a difference there, I'll grant you. But, they've got other ways of dealing with you. I mean, what was that chap? Yeah. Was it Nothouse who was sent to jail for producing his own silver coins?
Well, he was a terrorist, Alasdair.
He was branded a terrorist. Now, to my mind, it's exactly the same end result as what happens to artists in China.
No, it's
our freedom is illusory. It's a lot more illusory, perhaps, than in China. It's the fact that you lack freedom is far more direct and obvious.
And I don't want to say that those situations are somewhat rare. I mean, criminal justice system in the UK as well as in the US is just a basket case that really just metes out horrible results. Unjust. The whole war on drugs, or as you would call it, the drugs war, is just beyond the pale. All of these things that really exist just to restrict citizens' freedom. And obviously there's people in high places that profit from the very illegality that they create. So I don't want to get into comparing our systems. Either one, it's just that ours has, with all of its limitations, all of its evilness, it's still managed to provide a good standard of living for the largest number of people until now. So you have to admit that.
Well, I would admit that, but I would draw your attention to one of the best books ever written, and that's Hayek's The Road to Serfdom.
I know, I've read it.
Just sort of look at it in that context.
Yeah, I'm aware of the alarming trends here. And truth is always the first casualty of government, and freedom is the second, let's face it. But, it's all we got for right now, so we don't have much we can do about it.
You're dead right. Anyway, so I mean, China is what China is doing is interesting, and I think it's a mistake to look at what they're doing purely in terms that we understand in our democracies. It's not like that at all. And as I said, I would repeat that I can see what the Chinese are doing because I've studied it. Whether they succeed or not, I honestly don't know. We won't know until after the event. But they do have a plan, which I can tell you is a lot more than we do.
We have no plan. We're strictly groping in the dark, hoping for a miracle. And
That's
world's
right. And
fresh out of miracles.
The other thing that this general said was that external wars are now financial.
Yeah.
And, that's something we ought to bear in mind. I mean, this is, you're not going to get, sort of Chinese invading your Southeast Asian allies or anything like that. And okay, there's a little bit of sort of argument over the ownership of some islands, principally because of the oil rights around it, I guess.
Yeah, one would think.
But you're not going to get any military action outside China from China. And the way in which she will prosecute her interests in the future will be through, the financial markets.
Yeah, I think you're correct.
And she's got the biggest arsenal in the world of U.S. treasuries.
Yeah, so, in a position to do it. We've given them the knife and are just waiting for them to stick it between our ribs and twist it, as it were.
Well, if it happens, they won't do it, obviously. That's not the Chinese style. The Chinese style is to do things quietly and leave no sign of their presence.
Subtlety.
So I think always look at it that way. Yes.
Subtlety goes at a premium with the Chinese, for sure. Hey, so then we're left with negative interest rates in the wake of what's happening with the Chinese devaluation, and this is just a intolerable topsy-turvy world that we're living in with negative interest rates.
Yes, I would agree with that entirely. I mean, to put it in the simplest terms, the bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, which I think was an old biblical proverb from somewhere or other.
Yes.
Really what that means is that, if you actually own something, if you can hold it, that is worth more than something which you don't own and can't hold, but may be promised to you in the future. And this is reflected in something called the time preference. In other words,
Yes.
The longer in the future that something is promised to you, the more you should discount its value.
The more risk. The higher the risk.
Yeah, and interest rates are a reflection of that risk. It's an expression of that risk.
Should be.
So the idea that suddenly cash is worth less than credit is actually standing everything on its head. It's a complete nonsense. And apart from the invasion of property rights, in other words, they're saying, okay, you've got a deposit in the bank. We're going to tax you 2% per annum on that, or 5%, or whatever it is. Apart from that, you've got the problem that they're going to create all sorts of financial distortions, and there's no knowing where it would end. One of the things which I think is extraordinary is it will throw all commodity markets into an immediate state of backwardation, or a natural state of backwardation, because the pricing of a commodity which is due for delivery today compared with delivery in the future is a reflection of interest rates. Now, if you have negative interest rates, then that basically means that the value of something today is worth less than what it would be tomorrow. Now, what you're doing here is you're in effect distorting the market in such a way that you're likely to undermine the purchasing power of your currency quite rapidly. I mean, just imagine if you can't take your money out. We discussed actually before this podcast that there are restrictions on Americans taking their cash money out of the banks. It's the same in Europe. I should point out. If you can't take your deposit out of the bank in the form of cash, then what are you going to do? Are you going to be happy holding money which is taxed at the rate of a negative interest rate? No, you're going to spend it. You're going to get rid of it as quickly as possible. Now, if everybody's preference for money falls relative to their preference for goods, then it's quite simple what happens. You find that prices suddenly take a jump, and you get a collapse of confidence in the currency. I don't think the central banks actually understand what they're messing with here. It is very, very serious. And, I'm sure that some of your listeners might think, well, okay, they've done this in Denmark, they've done this in Switzerland. We're not talking in the case of the krona or the Swiss franc about a major currency. in the US now, I know they're not really talking about negative interest rates yet, but they're beginning to raise the subject. We're talking about the world's reserve currency. Mm-hmm. And the effect, I think, in fact, I would be surprised if negative interest rates do not collapse the purchasing power of the dollar.
Really? Well, we do have a lot of derivatives messes going on right now too. So, which is gonna happen first? I don't know the answer. Alasdair, so where do we find you now? Where do we read your work?
Well, I write most of the time for Gold Money, so that's on goldmoney.com. And I also have my own website, which mirrors what I write for Gold Money, basically, and a few other things maybe. And that's financeandeconomics.org, O-R-G.
All right. Excellent. And as always, you will find the link to Alasdair's site on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Check out the site, sign up for the mailing list. You'll automatically be included in the upcoming series of webinars. Next one coming up early November, how to pay off your mortgage in 5 to 7 years without really trying. And Alasdair, it's always great to talk with you. It's been too long. We will talk with you again much sooner next time. You be well.
It's my pleasure, and thank you, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.